What's up, guys? Coming at you this week with the second portion of the Zero to Hero challenge for the KSM on this Protection Paladin Fresh 70 to 2000 IO. Last week we had the first portion of the video, which was 0 to 1500 IO, and I'll leave the link in the description if you haven't gotten around to seeing that yet. But for this week, we're going to be focusing on 1500 to 2000 IO as well as normal raid for some tier and preparations for going to 2500 IO, also known as Keystone Hero. Now, I intend on making at least 2 videos to cover that process, but let me know in the comments if you guys would actually be interested in seeing that, as it is not as easy of a push as this was, but it is still very, very much doable. So if you guys are looking for class specific information or information on which build I've been using, I'm going to leave it in the description, but there's more information available in the first video, so I'm not going to actually go over this again because it will be repetitive to those who have already seen it. What I will say though is that I will give you a couple of tips on when to loot your Great Vault so that you are making the best use of it, as well as what I will be considering as an upgrade strategy for my current champion items. So as you guys can see, I was fortunate enough to get Raid Finder tier as well as Heroic tier for the first Great Vault. And I'm going to leave those there for now because I'm actually going to go and do Raid Finder difficulty as well as normal difficulty beforehand, just to make sure that I don't get duplicates of anything that is in the vault. And what I mean by that is, let's say that I'm doing normal or looking for raid and I happen to come across a set chest piece or pair of gloves. If I were to roll on those and win, I would already have that piece from raid, so that would open up a choice for me in my vault, right? And now you might be saying, okay, well, you know, you have heroic gloves, why would you take normal gloves? Because if I were to take normal gloves instead of heroic gloves, I would be able to choose the heroic chest that I got there and convert that instead of converting a normal piece of champion gear. So at the end of the day, that's still better stats. So I ended up clearing, looking for raid, as you can see, all the wings that were available as well as the world boss, and unfortunately I didn't receive any loot. The world boss did manage to drop me a 460 belt, but I already have the Abyss belt, so that was not an upgrade for me. So as you can see, we're gonna do one last thing before we actually head out, and that's increase my item level a little bit and upgrade the items that I currently have that are champion track, just because I'm already capped on flight stones, so it would actually be a waste to continue to do instances and not get anything out of it other than crests. So right now I'm sitting at 451 eye level, and the idea is that by the time I finish my 2000 IO run, I should be somewhere around 465 eye level. And in order to do that, I'm going to be getting every single piece of champion gear that I have and upgrading it to 4 out of 8, which is somewhere around 463 eye level. So again, this is just personal preference, and this is actually my personal strategy. If you don't agree with it, you're no way forced to do this. I ended up taking all of my champion pieces and upgrading them to 4 out of 8 on the upgrade track, which would bring them to 463 eye level, and that's including the main hand weapon. What I did not waste any resources on was upgrading veteran gear that I still had equipped, like my shield and cloak and one of my rings, for example. So one of the things I could have done a little bit differently here was just to not upgrade any of my main pieces, like shoulders, chests, gloves, etc. Pieces that would ultimately be replaced by tier gear. That could have saved me a couple of crests and a couple of flight stones in the end, but again, I was not sure if I was going to replace these or not, and when I was going to actually replace these. So with that out of the way, we go into the first instance, which is Blackroot Cold. I opted to do this at plus 15 because particularly this is not a very hard instance to tank. On Tyrannical, I did not expect any of the bosses to actually be much of a threat, and they actually were not. So as you can see, our healer actually doesn't really know the mechanics for this fight, and he's pretty open about it after it's over. He ended up going down 3 times due to Shadow Bolt Volley tick because he didn't know he had to heal through that. So even with the deaths, we're still able to pull through. So I think that overall just makes this one of the dungeons you should be pushing if you're having a hard time with Tyrannical. So I think this might actually be one of the harder ones for this week, and not because of Tyrannical, but because we have Bursting and Entangling. Now, Entangling isn't really a problem for Paladins because you could just put Blessing of Freedom on yourself and avoid it completely, but there's a lot of big trash packs in this dungeon, so DPS is going to have to watch out so that the stacks don't get too high and make this out of control for healers. So moving on to Dark Heart Thicket, managed to get into this 14, and this right here is exactly where I knew things would go wrong. So traditionally this is a double pull, and I think every single key that I've joined for this dungeon, every tank has made a double pull, including myself. And this guy here just goes and shoots ahead of the tank, completely botching it up, wasting time, and complaining about the tank not having aggro, which is actually kind of funny because you should misdirect if you're going to do that. But anyways, as all toxic players, when they do mess up, they'll find a way to blame someone else for it. And this right here is the perfect example. Dude here has died several times, does not use a single defensive, the healer calls him out on it, and then his little buddies all start to dogpile on this poor guy. Now, I've been around the block this game for a pretty long time, and I know that it's best to just stay out of these discussions because they're just going to start dogpiling on you as well. Here you can see dude complaining about getting feared, but he's not even contributing to interrupts. Anyways, excessive toxicity led to me and the healer leaving, and then they ultimately resorted to making death threats about murder, curb stomping, and whatnot. So some of these people are completely insane, and I hope Blizzard removes them from their platform. So moving right along, just formed another pug and took on this plus 13 Dark Heart Thicket, which is, in my opinion, one of the harder dungeons for this week. And that's mostly due to Oakheart, which is the second boss on Tyrannical. I personally feel that his uproot mechanic is a little overtuned at the moment, as most tanks won't have enough cooldowns to cycle through them appropriately. Continue with a plus 15 Wake Rest Manor. I think this is one of the easier keys to push this week. So word of advice, if you're having trouble with staying alive due to boss damage, this might be one of the keys that you should be looking to push a little higher to compensate for that rating. So the reason being here is just I think that trash is overall a lot harder in this dungeon than the actual bosses, save for the triad. And even then, just doing mechanics and pitching in with interrupts should be more than enough. So the next dungeon on the list is Atal'Dazar, and I personally feel that this is one of the harder dungeons for Tyrannical, and that's mostly due to 2 reasons. The first one being Razan is an absolute monster of a boss to tank. His bleed damage is completely insane, and it will just destroy any tank if they're not cycling cooldowns appropriately. And stepping over any of these purple bone piles to my right, either players or the boss himself, will trigger an ad. That ad is going to be a bone velociraptor, and that just makes the fight insanely harder. Luckily for this attempt, we didn't actually have any spawn, so we were able to get through it. So the second reason why this dungeon is actually a little bit harder on Tyrannical is due to the last boss. Now, Yasma had some changes this week. She has a skill called Racking Pain that used to be kickable, and it is no longer kickable. And what that essentially means is that periodically someone in your party will just take a 400,000 damage hit to the face, and they won't be able to do much about it. But I still think that the main problem for this fight are the spiders. So she will periodically spawn spiders, and when they're not glowing, they will just randomly walk around the vicinity. But when they are glowing, they will actively start to chase your party members. The way you get around this is just kite her in a clockwise or counterclockwise, doesn't really matter, fashion, and have the entire party stand behind her clumped up. That will make all the spiders start to seek your party members, and you will always be ahead of them. Good tip here as a paladin is to use wings and divine toll on soul rend to help your party get rid of the ads. It usually helps out quite a bit. At 1911 rating, we have very few options, which brings us to everyone's favorite nightmare, Throne of Tides. I actually don't think this is a bad key for this week. You could argue that this is a lot harder on Fortified than it is on Tyrannical, and that's mainly because the trash is just so disgusting on this instance, especially these dogs and the gauntlet. So what I personally do here is just I bubble at around 10 stacks to help out the healer, and that seems to solve the bleeding issue. But in a general sense, ideally what you want to be doing here is making good use of interrupts and line of sight where needed to split the pulls. This boss is, in my opinion, the hardest one in the dungeon for Tyrannical week, and the best advice that I can give you is as soon as he spawns the totem, make sure that you are focusing it down immediately, and always have at least 1 or 2 cooldowns to pop for every time that he has his totem up. For the gauntlet itself, what I like to do is I'll use Divine Toll on the first pack of goblins, pull the first water elemental apart from the second pack of goblins, and then I'll go in and pull the goblins themselves. It's always important to keep them interrupted because Aqua Blast, I believe, is what they cast, and it will literally one-shot people in Fortified week. I know it's not the case here, but it's still worth interrupting. So the hardest part, I think, is the middle portion here, and that's because that Pat's pretty close to that group of goblins, and the last thing you want to do is pull them together. So make sure you split that pull, and make sure you also clear all your stacks before pulling the last 2 mobs in the corridor. So a lot of people are afraid of this boss, and I believe he seems to be the key breaker. I don't think this one is particularly that hard. I actually think that the third boss is a lot harder than this one, but this one does require a lot more coordination. That's because most times people are just going to be dropping the ink spread out instead of clumped up. So what you ideally want to do here is just drop them clumped up in melee range and have all of your DPS stand together and drop them right next to each other. If you're the tank, the way that you can contribute to this is when the ads spawn, you can collapse all of them on top of an existing puddle for DPS to nuke down. Every time one of the ads dies, it'll also spawn a clump of ink. So if they're already on top of existing ink, it will help with the spread. The way I do this is I pop Divine Toll to silence them, pop a heavy cooldown, and sit on top of the ink healing myself while the party kills them. This helps with the spread immensely. I decided to save Dawn of the Infinites, both Galakrond's Fall and Murazon's Rise for last. And this is because I just believe that these are the hardest dungeons for this rotation. And that is in part because the bosses hit really hard, the trash is terrible, there's a lot of it, and also these are the newest dungeons, so some people actually still don't know the mechanics for this. I recently ran into a plus 17 group where we had ranged DPS and healers that didn't know what to do with the orbs. For Murazon's Rise specifically, I believe that the battlefield event is the hardest boss on Tyrannical, and that's because of the Moral Strike effect that is put on the tank, which reduces healing by 75%. Making it so much harder for healers to deal with. Tanks will have to effectively cycle their cooldowns in order to survive this. For Colonel Lord Deos himself, which is the boss being shown at the moment, I don't think that this is much of a challenge. All you have to do is just continue to DPS the keepers, and once he lands, you kite him in a circular fashion around the room, avoiding the swirlies. In my case, this ended up being the dungeon that gave me the KSM achievement. It put me at 2031 rating, giving me the completion of Keystone Master, as well as the achievement and the token that comes with it. I ended up reaching 2000 rating with 456 eye level and one dungeon left to do. Recall, we ended up pushing a little bit higher last week because we actually didn't know how some of these bosses would be for Tyrannical. So since I only had 7 keys done, I ended up just completing this one anyways because it would give me a nice boost to my rating and also be the 8th dungeon for the week, giving me the 3rd chest on the vault. Ended up completing it at plus 13 for a final rating of 2088. And the last thing that I will be doing for this week will be normal raid. So I found a pickup group and smashed this out really quickly. On the first boss, I actually got pretty lucky, got the shield to drop, and ended up winning it. This is great for me because I was still wearing a World Quest shield on the veteran track. So believe it or not, it's not the best piece, but it's still a massive upgrade. Unfortunately for me, I didn't end up getting anything else from the remaining bosses, with the exception of Firak. Firak actually dropped some amazing tank loot. He ended up dropping the Bis weapon for Paladin, the tank trinket, and 3 pieces of Omni token, which is the wild card for tier. Good part is I ended up winning one of those tokens, which essentially allows me to complete my 4-piece this week instead of having to wait for reset and the second catalyst charge. But I'm actually even more happy about the fact that I ended up winning the weapon, which was insane because I was the only person in the raid that actually rolled on it. And what's even more insane is that I don't even have this weapon on my main, and it makes a huge difference because it is a massive DPS gain from what I was currently using. It's also important to note that now that I have a Bis weapon and a champion shield, I will be able to upgrade both pieces to 476 because they are actually the greatest benefit. And this is just to touch back on what was mentioned at the beginning of the video, not to loot your great vault as part of the gearing strategy. And now I can actually go back and pick up that piece that was in the great vault, knowing that I didn't have that drop during the raid and do not have the risk of having a duplicate for this week. With that said, I looted the token from the vault, went to the vendors in Emerald Dream, and chose my tier from the KSM token as well as the curio from Firak. So here I ended up picking the shoulders, heroic version of them, just purely for transmog reasons. I have a lot of these pieces on my main, but unfortunately I don't have the shoulders, so I just ended up picking them. For your choice, you might want to stick to something like either the helmet or the chest piece, because I don't actually think that the legs are best in slot for tier. So here I could have chosen to upgrade my chest piece, but I just went with the legs because, again, transmog. This is one of the pieces that I don't have for the set, so I just ended up choosing to do it. I don't believe this is a Bis piece, but again, if you're in this situation, you can just choose to do a different piece. I had my own personal reasons for doing it, but that's that. So with that being said, I ended up the week not really pushing too hard, but I ended at 2127 rating with 464 item level after upgrading most of the pieces that I got. Ended up picking up a new trinket from Dark Heart Ticket that I did at a higher level. and overall I am pretty satisfied with where this character ended up. So if you guys are interested in seeing the push to 2500, please make sure to comment, let me know. I'm going to try to record that and have it out within the next 2 weeks. So if you're a new viewer and this has helped you in any way, please make sure to subscribe and like. And if you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for the support. We've actually seen quite a bit of traffic in the channel over the last few days, and this has helped us immensely. So thank you, and a big shout out to you guys. See you out in season 3.